I gotta say, it is very exciting when I get to talk to you guys about brand new products, things that are hyped and just new technology and whatever that's coming out. But every so often, it is good to go back to the roots and talk about those headphones or those pieces of gear that paved the way that are still staples today. And today is one of those days that I want to talk to you about an absolute legend on the high-end audio market. What's cracking, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Sennheiser HD800S. Now, this headphone retails in at $1,799, and I would like to send a big thank you out to Audio46, who did send this over so that I could get this review on it. I will be sending this back by the time I'm done with this video. So the 800S was first introduced back in 2016 and has gone through some minor cosmetic changes since its first introduction, and this is going to be the latest model that you would get if you would purchase it today. Now, it is an open back dynamic driver headphone. The driver itself is 56 millimeters and has 300 ohms of impedance and 102 dB per 1 volt of sensitivity. Now, I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of the driver, but I can tell you that the voice coil itself is 40 millimeters, and it is wound in-house by Sennheiser. They have a lot of videos, in fact, going through the process of making this headphone because it is such a staple to Sennheiser. I suggest checking that out. In fact, I'll probably link something down below so you guys can do that. Now, to look at the build and comfort of the headphone, I gotta say, to me, the build is just luxurious. Now, it is plastic, and you might be thinking for $1,700, that's to be plastic is pretty bold, but I got to tell you, this is aerospace grade quality materials that they're using here. There is a matte metal finish that you're going to see throughout this headphone as well. The headband system is steel underneath, and it is just, in my opinion, a beautiful headphone to look at. And you get these nice deep cups that you're going to notice here, so your ears aren't going to touch on the inside of the headphone. It's very wide and spacious to put your ears within. And I got to say, the adjustment system on this headphone too, this expands out quite a bit, and it also shrinks quite a bit. So this is going to fit many different sizes of heads, which I really like. Now, comfort-wise, the pads here are this very soft microfiber material, and the headband is no different up top. It's also microfiber, only weighs 330 grams, and it's just super comfortable on the head. It's got slight cup swivel here, and then I call this kind of a rotation so that you can get just enough clamp force on your head. And I got to tell you guys, I mean, this is very comfortable, as I said. Now, I do get a hot spot wearing this headphone, but I think that's just because of my personal head shape. And I know if I were to own a headphone like this over time, being a steel band, it's something that would kind of mold and shape to your head. I have found this on other headphones, so I'm not going to knock that for comfort because it is so comfortable and just kind of disappears on your head with how they designed it. Now, the connection to the cups for the detachable cable is their own in-house design, so this is not going to be a universal type cable like a dual 3.5 or even a push-pull mechanism or something like that. But they do give you inside the box, let's talk about that really quick. They do give you two cables. You're going to get a 4.4 balance cable as well as a 6.3 single-ended cable. Now, I will say both cables are very nice. They're very thick, but they're very long. So if you want a cable that you can kind of move around your room while you're listening to these, you're going to be taken care of here. Me, personally, I prefer shorter cables for my listening scenario. So, if you want something like that, you're going to have to go aftermarket to get a shorter cable for this. Also, the box itself, like once you open the outside box, you get another box inside that is very thick cardboard. You open it up and it has this nice opening to it, and it's got a foam insert that holds the headphone. You're going to get, of course, the two cables. You're also going to get a microfiber bag to hold the cables in. You're going to get a very thick brochure booklet that will discuss the Headphone and Sennheiser. Now, I personally didn't flip through this book because it's not my headphone. I didn't want to go through that. And then you also get a USB stick that will have more information on the headphone measurements and things like that. So, you know, very detailed package that they include with the headphone. And I was perfectly fine with that inside the box. So, with all that being said, guys, let's talk about sound. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about low end first with the bass. And unfortunately, I hate to start on the negative aspect of this headphone, but the bass is probably the weakest part of this headphone. The bass response is just, it's light, it is pleasant, it's got good extension to it, it's just not very full bodied. And I do want to talk about, you know, drivability of this headphone because I think that's important, being 300 ohms. But I got to tell you and give you a little bit of a spoiler ahead of this, in that if you throw this on tubes, you're going to thicken up your sound. You're going to thicken up that bass a little bit. If you EQ this, or you throw this on something like an IFI product that's going to give you that X bass button, it's not going to suddenly make this a bass cannon of a headphone. It just doesn't do that. In fact, adding a little bit too much will distort that bass a little bit because it just doesn't have that as a feature of this headphone. I would call it more of like a classic type headphone with the sound of the bass. And I don't mean classical music. I just mean pleasant enough to give you enough information. So if you are listening to classical music, to jazz music, to natural instruments, you're going to get enough of that information. There's not a ton of slam into the bass. It's just pleasant. To give you a quick track example for this, as I always like to do, Fire the Editor by James Blake, which... don't fire the editor of this video, that'd be me. You know, this track is a fun one to listen to because it's a very chill track, and there's this nice sub bass that goes through here, and it's very chill on the 800S. You know, you throw that track on a headphone that's got some bigger bass response, and you're just going to get more fullness out of that and more body. And like I said, that just doesn't happen with the 800S. And I'm not going to continue to repeat myself on the bass because that is just what it is. It's a little bit bass light. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about mid-range. All right, and so no pun intended when I say middle of the ground when I talk about mid-range, but to me that's kind of the second best feature of the sound on this headphone is the mid-range. It is very big, very full, very expansive, but at times it can be a little bit lean and doesn't always give you that upfront presentation of a mid-range if that's something that you're looking for. And I have a theory. And this is very subjective. I don't have any kind of science behind this, so take that for what it is. But as I listen to more and more headphones that are expansive and have bigger stage, more times than not, I've noticed that the mid-range sometimes can be a little bit more of that relaxed nature or lean nature. And my theory there is because it does expand so well, you're just not getting that upfront presentation quite as much. And it gives the impression that mid-range is a little bit lacking when actually it's not. Timbre here is excellent with the mid-range. Instrument separation is excellent, and I want to give you a track example to talk about that, and that's Man with a Golden Arm by Joe Perry. This track has a lot of different instruments going on here, and it sounds big on the 800S. I mean, no surprise. And the mid-range is just, it's full enough and gives you enough of those details, but it's not really punchy. It doesn't have a ton of dynamics to it, and I would say at times not quite as bitey with some tracks that'll be, you know, rock and roll music, things with guitars, you know, those types of genres of music just don't have that extra snap and bite to them like I might want out of my mid-range until you do some things with this. And hang on, that's a spoiler here for a few minutes that I will talk about, but that's kind of how I see the mid-range of the 800S. And as I said, with those dynamics there, what I really think you're getting here is an excellent mid-range for classical music, for jazz music, for natural instruments. You know, I think it does okay with rock and roll music and things like that, more on a smoothened out nature, you know, something chill. It's going to sound really good. And I think vocalists are very good on this headphone as well. They are not push forward vocalists, but you get nice breath and nice information there. And man, do they expand. I mean, no doubt that's what this headphone does. And you'll hear more of that as we segue into treble. All right, and so this is where I think this headphone really starts to shine in more ways than one, and that is the treble response. There is a ton of detail into the treble with the 800S, but this is also where you get that air and that extra expansive stage that is so well known about the 800S. And there is a track, of course, that I'm going to give you an example of, and that is Little Wing by Ainsley Lister. Now, this track is kind of my favorite music, but it's got some electric guitar going on here. There's vocals going on here with her voice, and there is some sizzle to her voice, no doubt. And this headphone will show up some sibilance because it's got those extra details in the treble, and it doesn't shy away from that all the time. It's not quite as piercing and stabby, I would say, as maybe like a Bear Dynamic or even a Hi-Fi Man for sure, but it does get up there and does peak and can be fatiguing at times for some people, depending on what kind of track you're listening to and how well it's mastered. I think really makes a big difference too. But to get back to this track, with this electric guitar I'm talking about, on the second half of the track, it really gains that treble energy and it really shines those details through on the treble. And for me anyway, it just approached the edge of being piercing, but it never got there for me. So that's what tells me that for somebody else that's more sensitive to that, you may pick that up a little bit with the treble, but it is just an excellent detailed treble response out of this headphone, and probably one of my favorite treble examples of how something should sound for me anyway on this headphone. And as I said, that kind of goes into that big expansive airiness and stage that this headphone represents so very well. Again, why I think classical and jazz music are going to work so well with this. But I even enjoyed metal music on this because it has enough speed to keep up with that. And as long as there's not just tons of that high energy in that track all the time, it doesn't get quite as fatiguing for me. And this actually kind of segues me to talk about gaming for a minute here. And really, I could do a whole entire video on gaming on this headphone. It's just something that everybody talks about. The 800S is known to be the best high-end gaming headphone, and there's a reason for that. The expansive stage that this has, the details of the treble, and the fact that it doesn't have overpowering bass, this is like a high-end cheat code for first-person shooter gamers and competitive gamers. But I wouldn't even stop there, because if I play immersive games, you know, Cyberpunk 2077, even Baldur's Gate 3, even Starfield, which I've been playing, I mean, all of that, you know, has good information in space and imaging and direction, and all of that is excellent on this headphone for gaming. And I highly recommend being able to have that experience at some point if you can, but this is a lot of money to spend just on that. And you also have to consider that you're going to need proper power for this headphone as well. So you gamers out there, don't just plug this into your PC or the back of your motherboard and expect this great sound I'm talking about. You're going to need something a little bit more. And that's segueing me into my next part. I feel like I should have like one of those segue things that you kind of... Anyways, let's go ahead and talk about power, guys. All right, so the DAC I use on all my videos for the most part is my RME ADI2DAC, and that has an amp out of it that has sufficient power for many, many headphones, this one included. But for my personal taste, the ADI2DAC just doesn't quite get enough out of a headphone for me if it's a harder to drive headphone. My ZMFs, this headphone here, and so I pair that up with my Cayin IHA6 and my Liquid Platinum, because both of those have a lot of power coming out that just give that extra oomph to a headphone. Now, the IHA6 on balanced gives it tons of power, but it's also very low on the output for how much ohm it's gonna put out. I think it's like 0.3, something like that. So when I paired this headphone up on single-ended on the high output of 120 ohms out of my ADI2DAC, I felt like it opened up this headphone more and really expanded that mid-range a little bit better. And the IHA6 is kind of known for giving almost a tube-type flavor to the sound, because there is some noise that you can pick up here and there depending on the track. But I loved just that extra bit of details I was getting out of that combination. But to go further down on that, you throw this headphone on tubes, on a true OTL tube amp, my bottlehead crack, that is some magic, man. That is like the peanut butter to the jelly. That's like the Tom to the Jerry. That's like the milk to your cereal. That's too many... But you see what I'm saying? It's just, it pairs so very well with tubes, and it really thickens up the sound. And to go back to what I was talking about with genres of music, when I listen to this headphone on tubes, rock and roll and things, yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's where I was really digging into my music and getting some of that crunchiness of the guitar. It added a little bit of that distortion, a little bit of that funk, and just really made me dig my music out of this headphone on an OTL tube amp. And that is a wonderful combination. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily something you'd use for surgical listening or maybe even something like gaming, but man, it just makes this headphone so much more fun, in my opinion, because that's not going to be for everyone. But you own a headphone like this, you owe it to yourself to at least try it on a tube amp or borrow somebody's tube amp out there and check it out and see for yourself. Just make sure, like I said, an OTL tube amp with decent enough power can really give you some flavors on this. And don't even get me started on tube rolling, because I haven't got into that yet, but just talking to buddies of mine, you can tube roll it, even do even more with this headphone. You could probably tame that treble a little bit. I mean, just all kinds of things that makes this headphone so much fun to tinker around with different combinations. So that's kind of going to wrap up this video, I think, on where I stand with A800S. It is a wonderful headphone. It's a fantastic experience. I'm really glad I was able to enjoy that. Thank you again to Audio 46 for that experience. And I could see this fitting a lot of people's preferences and why this headphone is still so important in 2023 for something that came out in 2016. Yeah, there's hype. There's new things that comes out every day. But it's things like this that are not going to go away. And I think that's dope. And I mean, that's kind of the experience that we get out of this hobby, the experience that I get out of this hobby, and why I enjoy listening to so many different pieces of gear, headphones, and pairings, and all of that. So there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If so, please smash that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and support me along the way. I highly appreciate that, just like I highly appreciate you watching this video. All right, guys, I will see you in the next one.